Okay, it's 2 minutes past on my computer. So I know that we probably will still have some people joining us, but I think we should get started. My name is Astrid Arnesen, and I am the president of the European Huntington Association. And we are really happy to be able to host this webinar tonight. And we are grateful that all of you have registered and attending, because we think this will be a really interesting evening for all of us. This webinar will be a slightly different format on telling about research than what you may have heard before, where usually professional scientists or the pharma representatives present what they are doing. This will be presented from us in the sense that HD COPE is HD Coalition for Patient Engagement, and the people in our panel who will very shortly present themselves are all members of HD COPE, and they are all from Huntington families, and they are giving input to research based on their lived expertise with how Huntington's is. So before we get really started with the program, I want these panelists to present themselves, to tell you just very briefly who they are, and I think I will give you the word to Anne first. You need to unmute yourself, my friend. There you are.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne Lennon-Bird, and I am from Ireland. My husband has Huntington's disease. He is ill for over 30 years now. We have 3 children. 2 of our 3 children have tested positive. So that is how I became involved in the Huntington's Association of Ireland, and I've been an active member with them for over 20 years. And I was absolutely delighted to be given an opportunity to work with HD COPE.
Thank you. Christina, tell us who you are.
Hello, everybody. Well, I am very happy to be here, and thanks to EA for taking this initiative for sharing all of our perspectives and work that we have been doing through HD COPE. And I'm very glad that we are doing this with our elder family from HD community in much countries and very different countries at the same time. It's very good to be here virtually and together as well. So forgive me for my non-native English. Well, it's not the best English, but I think in Portuguese would be worse to understand. So I am Christina Freda. I'm from Portugal. I was born in Mozambique. I live in Lisbon. And I am 49 years old. I came from a family member. My mother is in late stage of Huntington, and she was pretty much the first known case in the family. Now we know there were others, non-diagnosed, but I am a family member. I'm also involved as the coolest, someone said, association, the Portuguese association, from 2013, and on the board and involved in, I joined the HD COPE since the beginning in 2017, and I am tremendously proud to be there because I think we are making good steps and strong steps, putting our insights as family and as an HD community and our experience into the very, very first beginning of our promising times in research and clinical trials and for therapies. So I'm all in for this, and I think it's a pleasure to be here with all.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Dina.
Good evening, everyone, virtually, which is the new normal these days. I'm Dina De Souza. I live in Scotland. I don't sound Scottish because I was brought up in Canada. but I've been in Edinburgh for 23 years now. I am from an HD family, so my father had Huntington's disease. He passed away 7 years ago, and we found out about his HD very, very late without having any prior knowledge. As soon as my father was diagnosed, I decided to do predictive testing for myself, and I've inherited the gene. I'm 57, but I'm still pre-symptomatic, so I'm still doing fairly well for my age. I'm involved with a lot of different committees. I'm a board member of the European Huntington's Association. I'm also a board member of the Scottish Association, and of course of this. Hi, Marie. She's from the Scottish Association also. And of course with HD COPE, which is for me, one of the most exciting committees to be on. It is very exciting times for the HD community with all the clinical trials that are going on, which is absolutely incredible. And being part of this committee, which we'll talk more about later, is fabulous. So hopefully we'll have a very interactive session with everybody that is online tonight.
Thank you, Dina. Rob.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Hasselberg. I am from the Netherlands, based close to Amsterdam, so should be familiar. I come from a Huntington family, so my grandmother passed away from Huntington's disease. My mother is now in a care home with Huntington's disease. And I myself am a gene carrier as well, so I also will develop Huntington's disease. I will say a bit more about what I do maybe in the presentation that I will give in a minute. I will leave maybe the floor to the others for now.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Hi everyone, Steve from England on the south coast. I'm a full-time carer. My wife Sandy has been symptomatic for about 20 years now. Her mother had it and her grandmother, so it's sort of quite well known in the family. Sandy's one of four. She has it and her brother is in a secure unit as well. Got involved in a light way in England and Wales. We've got a sort of something called HD Voice, which is a sort of patient panel which is linked to the HDA, and that's how I first sort of started to get involved with Huntington's. And I'm now a trustee of the HDA as well as chair of the local branch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Marius?
Hello, I'm Marius Bandoniou from Cyprus, living in Limassol. I inherited the gene from my father.
So.
I participate to Huntington Disease Association of Cyprus. Actually, I am the treasurer. And since last November, I belong also to HD COPE, to this great team.
Thank you so much. So this is the panel tonight. We have also additional members of HD COPE from Europe, but they are not able to attend today. And we think these people represent the team in an excellent way. And as you can understand, they come from different regions or the places in Europe, which we thought was really important, and also that they represent different perspectives on the disease directly from their own or from their spouse or partner perspective. So this HD COPE team is really a coalition together with the association and team members in America and Canada, North America and Canada, and was established 3 years ago. And the aim was that we wanted a clear patient voice into the process of making or developing drugs in Huntington's disease, because we think that the lived expertise is really unique, and it's only we who can bring that to the table. The others come with all their great expertise from different angles and topics, but we bring the lived expertise. And so far we have received very good response from the pharma companies that have consulted us, and they are saying that it's extremely useful for them to be able to discuss with family members on different perspectives. You will learn more about what that can be, more of that tonight, but I think first I want Rob and give him the word, because he will present some of the really most important things going on right now, seen from his chair.
Thank you, Astrid. Yeah, so what we wanted to do is give a short presentation about, let's say, the clinical trials that are currently ongoing, or the developments you might have heard of through, let's say, the news or news items, newsletters, whatever came through Facebook, many sources of news. So I just want to give you a very short presentation, just give a bit of ins and outs, and I will do that. I'll not make it too technical. That's not the point. It's just to give you a bit of a glimpse of what is going on. So feel free, if you have any questions, you can write it in the chat. It's going to be monitored, so if there's any pertinent questions, they will be, Astrid or Maiken will wave their hand, and I can address it. So feel free to do so. Let me share my screen with you. Let's see if I can grab it here.
Can I also just say, just before you start, that
Yes.
if you haven't noticed, the meeting is being recorded, just so you know. Yeah.
Perfect. So, well, it is entitled HD Clinical Trials, a short introduction. Just maybe a bit on myself. So obviously I'm an HD co.
Okay.
And next to that, I'm a board member of the Dutch Huntington Disease Association. And through this HD co work, I've also been involved with Roche in their Generation HD1 clinical trial, where I am a patient representative in what they call the advisory board. So the board that oversees or gives advice, let's say, to this trial. And what I normally say, my 9-to-5 job, so what I do during the day is that I actually work at the University in Amsterdam as an assistant professor in chemistry and pharmaceutical sciences. But that's just for reference, maybe. So if you follow the news a bit, and don't go read the whole trial because I'll guide you through it, don't worry, is that there's a lot of things happening now in the clinical trial landscape. Meaning there's a lot of companies working on developing drugs that are sort of focusing on Huntington's disease. You can see on the top one, Roche, that is probably the most known one to everybody, but there are a few more that are listed here. And this is not the whole list. I'm sure there are more companies working on other things. And let's say today I just want to break it up a little bit, just to cluster a few things together and discuss it, just to make it maybe a bit understandable for you what you see here. So first of all, I just want to say that, let's say how they are listed here are, let's say, the clinical status. So phase 3 is on top and preclinical is at the bottom, which means that the ones at top are closest to proven effectiveness. And I think I want to make a point of that. So they are not drugs yet. They have to show that they can be a drug, that they can treat a disease. And these people are working very hard on that. So, well, also not surprising, you hear the most from Roche because they are closest to what can be a drug, and the others are really somewhere along the process of getting there. And there are actually sort of 3 classes that we can distinguish, things that people are working on. So let's say the approaches that Roche and Wave take, and also the Regeneron, they are all based on, let's say, they call it RNA in some way, and are delivered intrathecally. So that's a lumbar puncture, actually, a needle in your spine, just to put it easily. Then there are some companies that actually focus on again, RNA or something, but they use viruses, or, well, virus sounds bad in these corona times, but harmless viruses or viral particles to get the medicine in the brain where it needs to be. And there are some companies now also focusing on what they are called small molecules. Simply said, they are, well, let's say your paracetamols and so on, but something else obviously that you can take orally, so a pill that you can take. So these are the approaches that people are now taking, or these companies are taking. So what do they do? And now I'm going to be the teacher for 2 seconds maybe, because what do we actually want to achieve? Maybe some of you know, or most of you will know that, let's say in a cell, we have our DNA, and that is where for Huntington's disease, the problem is that we have a repeat on our DNA that is too long. And when this DNA is transcribed, so when it is being transformed to this protein, it goes first, it's going to be transferred to what is called an RNA strand. And that RNA strand is read out by a system in the cell that makes the protein, so the Huntington protein, and that is the one that will, let's say, aggregate in our cells, in our brain mainly, and that causes the problems. So, of course, this gene, and we have this protein, and of course this is what we don't want, yeah? So we actually don't want to have this protein. So we want to stop this process one way or another. That's actually where everybody is aiming for. So how do you do that? That is then the question. Very simply stated, and I'm really oversimplifying a bit here, but what you can do is you can take something external, yeah, so indeed a pill or an injection or something, and administer something to a patient. So when you do that, if you do it right, and this molecule, this piece of RNA, for example, that Roche is now developing, it enters the cell and it binds to this RNA that comes from the Huntington gene. And when that happens, our body recognizes it as something bad and says, okay, we have to get rid of it. And the moment you can do that, and when you can achieve that, the protein will no longer be made, and you can sort of lower this, what they call then expression. And as a consequence, we don't have this protein, the protein cannot aggregate. So that should, let's say, prevent the disease from happening, or at least it will slow down extensively. So that's one approach. The other approach is an elegant approach, I would say. So rather than saying, okay, we have to have something external, we actually go in the cell and we make a little factory that is in the cell. And this factory is just a vesicle that makes this kind of medicine that you want in a continuous way. And so you have to administer it once, but then it makes this medicine, and it will in the end do exactly the same as the other products. It will bind to the mRNA and will prevent this expression of this protein. So again, you have a nice way of preventing this protein of being made. So those are the two different approaches that people are now aiming for. But of course, and I've said it already, it has to go mainly into the brain. That's the most important part where we want to go. So how do we get there? For but at least for the Roche trial and also for WAVE that I know of, they do lumbar punctures. So the easiest way to get into the brain is actually through the spine. There's a fluid in the spine that is in connection with the brain. So if you inject a medicine in the spine, it just actually automatically ends up in your brain, and it can work really as a treatment there. Of course, you have to take it the rest of your life if you want to have it to be effective. So the other approach that, for example, Unicure is trying to make these little factories in these cells, that is actually another approach actually, is where they do one in-time injection, but it will go directly into the brain. So they will have some needles for a bit of time in your brain, and they will administer the medication in your brain. And then it is there, it is fixed, and it will work, hopefully. And then the third one, that is easy. There are some companies that work on these drugs that you can take as a pill. again, this would be the ideal case because that's much less invasive, but again, as well, they are furthest away from proven effectiveness. So this is an idea what they are working on, but it's not something close by yet, unfortunately. And then I want to highlight maybe one approach specifically. That is the approach that WAVE is taking. So normally, let's say if as parent you get a kid, the kid inherits, let's say, the genes of the mother and from the father. So you have two copies of the same gene. So for Huntington, you have copies, one from the one parent, one from the other. And actually what all the approaches do so far is try to cancel out both copies of this gene. So no protein expression whatsoever. And WAVE has gone a bit in a different direction because they say, okay, don't try to read this whole code. This is just how DNA looks like. But you get two copies of your DNA from your mother and from your father. So in this case, for example, the mother would be the one carrying the Huntington gene, so the expansion. Yeah. And the father has just a normal gene. And actually that is not bad because that has the normal protein. And that one actually you might want to keep. So what they have done is located a little piece of DNA which has a difference between the mother and the father. And that's highlighted here randomly, let's say, where, for example, the mother has in her DNA a different letter, G, instead of the T. And this is what we call a SNP. And by making this little piece of RNA specific for this SNP, you can actually prevent that the copy of the mother is making the protein, but the father actually can still make the protein, which sounds really nice. It's a really elegant approach, also in my opinion. So no longer the mother, let's say the bad gene is not expressed, the good gene is expressed. There is one but. It's an interesting approach, but only 70% of the Huntington's disease patients that we know of now have one of these two SNPs that WAVE is now looking for. So let's say there's a chance that me personally, I would not have any of these SNPs, so this approach would then not work for me personally. But for the biggest majority, it might work. Then last, before I open it up for questions, or at least before we continue, I just want to say something about the timelines, because we get a lot of questions about that. Like, how close are we to a drug on the market? Because that is, of course, what we all want. So I just put all the phases of drug development. So initially we do discovery and preclinical work. So this is all lab benches in small scale. And then at some point, and I guess most of you will have heard about phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, phase 3 trials. So these are just every time a new step in taking a drug and bringing it to the patient, but testing if it is safe and it works and is sufficient in patients. So all these steps take time because we don't want to immediately go from a mouse to a human to try and see if it works. We have to be very cautious here. So most of the companies are somewhere in a preclinical phase, as far as I'm aware of. That means they have many years to go. And that is very difficult to predict because yeah, you never know how research will go. It looks all nice and promising, and well, we will have to see. WAVE and Unicure are already doing these kind of phase 1-2 studies, they are called. So they do 2 phases at once. That's actually a nice way of skipping some time. And I've been reading a bit this week, and I've found that WAVE is expecting to give some more information on their product, let's say the first half of 2021. So let's say within a year from now, whereas Unicure, they think they can present some data, let's say 2022, 2023. So that we will have to wait a bit, 2-3 years from now, to see if it is safe and a bit effective. And then Roche, they are the one in the last phase of the clinical trial. So they are really studying if it is effective. So if it's an effective treatment drug for us. And they expect to provide some data on that in 2022. So let's say beginning, so that's still 1.5 years from now, probably 1 year. So that is something that is maybe closest. And just to give you a bit of an idea, so just focusing on this Roche product, I found some, let's say, news news articles from 2013 already discussing this product with Roche actually involved. And they expect then, if everything goes well, in 2023, that is 10 years later, to have it going to the FDA or the EMA for approval to the market, if all goes well. So you can see this timeline is about 10 years, maybe even longer with the work before. So, well, no, this is how clinical trials are done. You have to be careful and do good research on them and make sure it's safe. So yeah, this is something you have to keep in the back of your mind if you hear these kind of things. It takes a bit of time to get there. Then last, I just want to give a few disclaimers. Any clinical trial is exactly that. It's a trial. We also say try. You know, it's a try. They try to see if it is effective, but it doesn't mean it's a drug now. Only after approval, it's a drug, and we are sure, we can be sure that it works. So we shouldn't, I mean, we always have to be optimistic, but also be realistic that it can also fail at this stage still. Having said that, so it is an investigation into the effectiveness of something that could become a drug. But unfortunately, there might be no benefit for patients. But again, it is very important for people to be involved. So HD-COPE, but also not only HD-COPE members, but also the people that are in these trials. They are very important because without these people, these trials could not happen. So yeah, everybody, no, that's too much. But everybody that can get involved should be involved to try to make them as successful as possible. Unfortunately, sadly, there is no guarantee on success, but only thing we can try is, or only thing we can do is try. So I think with that, I'm done. If there are any questions, I'll happily take them.
Thank you, Rob. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat, or you may also pop in. I wonder, when you have explained how complex and long this process can be, Rob or anybody else of you in HD-COPE, what are you thinking about this process? Is it too long? Is it strictly necessary? Are there anywhere we can make it more or faster? Or what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think at the moment, I think everybody here would like to see it go faster. But there's at the moment, I think, not a way to speed it up. Luckily for us, I always say Huntington's disease is a very slowly progressing disease. So if you want to see if something is effective, you have to wait a bit of time to see if it has an effect. We all know family members that progress in over 20 years, not in 2 months, let's say. So I think, yeah, our one good side is the other bad side, maybe, I think.
I think that, yes, it takes time, but all these steps are necessary, and because we want to get it right. I know that patients sometimes will say it's been over 25 years that the gene has been found, and why is there no cure yet? But things take time. And research is a slow process, and we want to make sure that it's done properly and that we get an effective treatment. Even if these treatments that are now in the pipeline don't work, there's still something that's going to be learned from this process.
I think the other thing that's really interesting about this, I mean, I'm fairly new to the whole kind of clinical trials thing, and once we sat down and it was explained to us, exactly the step you had to go to, it sort of became clear, why it takes time to do that. But the really interesting thing for me is that, so I've been involved with Huntington's. My mother-in-law was diagnosed in 1970, so that's 40 years now. And in those days, I said there was no light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, to be quite honest, there was no tunnel. But now this has opened up so many other areas, and that Rob, just indicated there are lots of other things out there that people are just beginning to talk about that could actually make what we're doing now almost redundant, because what's coming down the stream may actually be more effective, but it wouldn't have happened had these initial trials not been done. So there's real hope on that basis. And every week, every month you read something new. I mean, the latest one I was picking up from Ed Wild was somatic instability, which is where you may have a CAG repeat in your blood of 42, but with age and in other cells, it can get bigger. And that, they reckon, is something to do with the way that your DNA repairs itself. So when you see that graph about the age of onset, which is very, very wide, for somebody with different CAG repeats, they think that may be the issue. So that was never even looked at before, and now they think they might have a solution. So I think there's always, yes, it's slow, but somebody said to me right at the beginning, actually, in scientific terms, this is really quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, I think we can have a role on that. I think HD Cope was exactly a call. Everything has to be as fast, but still the data has to be as reliable as it is possible. And the truth is that, for example, Unicur's patient representative said that they had this problem in other rare disease. It took them 3 years to get a similar team as HD Cope on that rare disease. Imagine we could save 3 years with our patient's perspective into the protocol. Also, Roche engaged with the community, and it mattered on their time also. They recruited earlier than they planned in the beginning, and well, they had the fastest recruitment on the history of the company. So I think there's a sense of urgency with still reliable data that we can provide with the patient's daily. Of course, a day in a patient life is not the same as a day in a scientist's life, but perhaps we could join the effort and making this possible with a certain balance, but still very much faster than it was before.
Thank you, Christina. I think that's really interesting what you're saying, that we can play a role in helping, at least as much as possible. So I would like to ask, I think I'll start with you, Anne. As a HD Cope team member, what have been for you the most, you think, important thing you've done so far in giving input? What are the companies really asking from you?
Well, when you live with Huntington's, you live a very insular, lonely, isolated life. And for a very, very long time, there was no hope. There was no talk of treatments. There was no talk of anything. And now it's a very, very exciting time. For so long, you were on the outside, with nothing to look into. But now we are part of this beautiful group, HD Cope. We are meeting with the drug companies. We are talking directly to them. We have that opportunity. They are listening to us. So you're coming from a place of no hope to you're coming to a place where you really feel you are in the middle of things, and that your voice is important, and that your experiences are very, very important to them. And when you hear them talk, you know that they're listening. They're taking your ideas on board. They know you're taking your expertise on board. And as a family member, that is hugely, hugely important, because you feel like, for the first time in a very, very long time, I feel positive about living with HD, whereas for a very, very long time, I didn't. You know, Steve said a while ago, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel, there was no tunnel. Now there is a tunnel. Now we are very much in it. Now we definitely can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think it's coming from a place of isolation to a place where pharma companies are actively listening to us and taking our views on board and incorporating that into their research and into their protocols. And it's very, very empowering. It's wonderful.
Dina, from your perspective, because you also have a scientific background professionally, what do you think have been the most important things that HDCOPE could bring to the table to help research progress in clinical trials?
Well, for me, I think, just to echo everything that Anne said, which I think is spot on, but carers and patients have a voice, and they're the ones who are the experts in the disease. The pharmaceutical companies, they're the experts in the science, but a lot of them have never met an HD patient or other diseases. And our meetings with these companies have given them such an insight into what is daily life living with Huntington's. So something that may be important to them in the science part may not be what's crucial to us as a carer or a patient. And we have been able to give them that insight, and they've listened. And I think that's been such a valuable tool to be part of this group.
Can I just ask, because what do you think is important to you when you talk to the pharmaceutical companies? What do you usually focus on?
What's important in terms of the clinical trial, how they set up a clinical trial, and the patient burden and the carer burden, I think is a very valuable thing. A lot of times they feel that a lot more can be done, not knowing how much is involved with an HD patient, and giving them that insight that, no, you can't do it for a whole day because that's just not possible, that you need to have breaks, that you need to schedule things at different times. I think that's been a very valuable input into the meetings that we've had with the pharmaceutical companies.
If I may just add something, because Huntington's is a very, very complex illness. You have the movement disorder and the psychiatric disorder and the cognitive disorder. Every single patient presents differently, exactly differently. So when you are trying to write protocols like for trials or stuff like that, it's very difficult for them because they have to make a disease that is so broad, they have to focus it into a very narrow protocol for a trial. And so we would bring that expertise, like what the symptoms that my husband suffered might not necessarily be the symptoms that somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. So we are bringing a very, very, very wide, broad, experience to the table.
Can I just add on to that as well? I think for those people who query the eligibility criteria for trials, it was particularly difficult, we think, with Huntington's because what you're trying to do with a trial, isn't it? You start at a point, you measure something, you do something, and you measure at this point. And when you've got somebody with Huntington's who is potentially going all over the place because of the disease, how do you measure at the end to show that what you did was actually effective? Which is why often the clinical sort of criteria for the trials have to be drawn quite narrowly to try and almost normalize something which you can't normalize. I think that was one of the challenges that Roche had right at the beginning, is to actually how are we going to, you know, get somebody within the band that gives us a chance to measure that actually what we're doing is effective and not being affected by just natural progression of the disease.
Also, I would like to add to that, that in my opinion, in my own experience with the pharma, I think the importance is that we are in the ground basis. We are in the field with all the Huntington families. And I would highlight, well, without having any confidentiality problem, I would highlight two occasions that I think our role was pretty much important. One was that we can provide concrete data, concrete experiences. Like, for example, in the very first beginning of HDCO, first meeting, we were with a pharmaceutical company, and they were particularly trying to make the plan designing departing from this idea that the onset was on motor symptoms, and the most compromising things for the patients were motor symptoms. So they were designing above that. And that was the clinical concept for the onset, and they were trying to move that concept from to move it on to manifest and late manifest. So the thing was, we all know from the communities and from our own families that sometimes behavioral changes and subtle changes starts a decade before. So we pretty much have problems sometimes a decade before of the motor symptoms, and that they could be as disruptive and as impactful on families and as destructive as the motor symptoms, or even worse. So that that changed the point of view. They were starting to look to early stages, to pre-manifest stages, and this is a decision-making influence that we could be able to do it from the ground base. Because if we weren't there and if it wasn't for our experience, we were talking about the more motor symptomatic changes, and they would be perhaps disfocused from the very, very early interventions. And now we know, as soon as probably we would have meds and therapies, even when we are healthy. So it's going to be needed, so we could delay the disease progression. And it's not only clinical benefit from the reversible on the disease, but also preventing that diseases progresses faster, or that delaying the onset. And I think that perspective was given in the first meetings by the HDCO, and it is a very important perspective. Also,
thank you, Christina. Yes, really, and I think what can be really seen as self-evident in a way when you live with the disease is not really being understood, maybe even by people who have studied the disease from their perspective. I think now, because I'm cautious of the time, Christina, that we are at the point where we will allow you all to have a little break. I think I forgot to tell you that when we started the session, because 1 hour and a half is a bit long to be still. So we will encourage you to get up and stretch out and maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and then we will be back in 7 minutes. Okay?
And
see you.
If you want to ask your question, you are very welcome to just write it in the chat.
Please do so, or comment, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're about to have finished the 7 minutes break. I wonder, I can see from the names I know, from the people attending, that they come from very many different. And so far, the trials that we've had already being started has been done in a few countries. So basically, very often it's Germany, UK, the Netherlands, Spain, Poland, Italy. Is countries that is very often mentioned when a clinical trial is being planned. And I wonder because some of you have really stated how encouraging, how good it has been for you personally to be engaged in HD COPE because you feel involved in what's going on. I'm thinking, do you have any thoughts about what it will mean for the community, for instance, in Turkey or in Egypt, we have Shaima here, or other countries where they still have no trials ongoing. Any thoughts from you on that perspective?
Trials, just the logistics of things can't be done everywhere. And that's unfortunate. It takes a lot of work preparing for these trials, but I think the places that they are being done, if we get positive outcomes, then hopefully that those positive outcomes then will be made available worldwide. So just because you can't be in a trial doesn't mean that you won't then benefit from. I know it's hard to sit back because I personally would, so I don't qualify for the trials, but I sometimes feel like, oh, I wish I could be in a trial, but just the way I am, I want to participate and be part of what's going on. But I think it's also important to help in other ways, and you can help by being in, as example, enroll. There's so many sites around the world that you can do that, and those are just as important to participate in that. So yeah, I'll end my comment there.
Rob, you look like you wanted to say something maybe.
Yeah, I was actually thinking along the lines of Dina. I found myself thinking, well, Dina and me are sometimes the same in the way we think about things, I've noticed. But indeed, it is, of course, you have to consider, for example, the Roche trial. It included over 800 people, and of course, it's not in one site, it's on many sites, but just the logistics of doing that need to be in place. So it seems not fair that it happens in certain countries or certain places a lot, but it is for the fact that it can help speed up the process, figuring out whether this drug works or not. So in that sense, then it's for the benefit of the whole community. You know, the sooner we know, even if we know that the Roche product wouldn't work, it's better to know it as soon as possible than to have 5 years of more hope and be disappointed then. So I think it is for a good cause that they do it in the way they do it. It's not, and indeed, exactly as Dina said, I assume, or I'm fairly confident that once a product is there, everybody will benefit, and not only the countries that have done the trial. That is against all ethical rules, I would say.
But both you and Dina are from countries that are very often involved. So in a way, so Marius, you're from Cyprus, and there's nothing there, not even in Rome. What do you have any thoughts? Is that important, or?
For me, I think it's not important because, I mean, in my view, my personal view, of course, okay, if we have it in Cyprus, we would be very lucky. But I can understand that in Cyprus, we are a very small island. And I can understand that statistically, that is not so important. So I can understand the companies that they prefer to make the experiment, let's say, in their base in order to have a better supervise and better monitor of the research. So I fully understand this. As I say, if it happened this in Cyprus, I would be very happy, but I can understand the size of my country, and as well the structure of my country is not so organized. So I can understand this. So I do not have, I mean, I can't, because I can realize the dimension of the research that they are trying to do. I mean, I feel good with that because I feel that there are too many people that are working to find something for HD patients. So it's not so important, I think, to know. The most important is to find the best way to deliver the medicine.
So you're confident that it's an efficient way, and you will benefit from the drug if it's being developed.
Yes, I believe that because I mean, as I told you, Cyprus is a very small place. I mean, if you compare it with USA, it's I
Sure.
don't how much times it's bigger than us. So yes, I feel very confident for that because I mean through HD COP I can see the progress of that.
Yeah.
So I feel very confident for that.
Hmm. Shaima, I don't know if you can unmute and comment because you're from Egypt, representing Egypt, which has a huge population. So I think maybe 80 million or something, and a lot of HD patients probably. What are your thoughts about being involved or not in the ongoing research from Egypt?
For me, I have respect because I'm not a family member. I'm a physician dealing with the disease. And our problem in Egypt is that we don't have access to all cases. We don't know even the exact epidemiological data about the patient with Huntington disease in Egypt, and this is very frustrating. And what I'm trying to do is try to establish the HD community in Egypt by knowing where are the patients and what are the symptoms and how can we help them. First, we have to characterize the patient and to have access to them. And then the other problem is not all patients are well educated, so they cannot decide for themselves. And many of our patients just depend upon us to direct them and guide them. So we have another issue of we need to know everything about the disease and about the outgoing trials, and to know much in order to educate our patients and to provide the best for them. For me, I find the ongoing trial are amazing, and I am keeping an eye on the different phases and the results. And for me, I'm excited and waiting for the results of phase 3 from Roche. And I hope it could be something that's beneficial for the patient worldwide. And in my view, I hope the drug will, the potential drug will work for the whole patient all around, because I don't know if it could be of value for people in Egypt or not, because we don't have these genetic studies to say we have the same thing exactly like the patient in Europe or USA. Recently, when I just read about the disease and reading about the haplotypes difference in African gene and how it differs slightly from the European, I'm just trying to, I don't know how to say,
No, so you
to revise the knowledge.
Sorry for interrupting. Sorry for interrupting, but how I understand you is that there may be also from a scientific perspective some differences in the genetic material for different populations, so to speak. So it might be important to do some research from that to map really HD on a global basis, maybe.
Yes. This is my view, especially in Africa, where we don't have these studies on large scale, not only in Egypt. We are waiting till we can do something, and meanwhile, I'm trying to establish, as I said, the community and to have access to the patient and to try to know them, educate them, and prepare them either for a new drug or a new trial.
So let's play with that thought, because I really like to I have a saying here on the wall in my office or outside my office that says, if you can dream it, you can do it. Which means that if we should dream about the day that it's not completely unrealistic at all to dream about the day where we will have some treatment drug developed who may delay at least the disease progression and ultimately maybe keep it away and for the lifetime. What should be done in order to make it available for all, because that's really what we as a community want to advocate for and work for. Have you any thoughts about that, HD Cope, about what could maybe the community do in order to prepare, like Shama was really touching upon maybe from Egypt?
Well, Ireland is a very, very small country, and we do not have drug here either. So we are very much like you and like Marius in Cyprus. We are just waiting on the sidelines, waiting for this treatment to come. But what can we do now? We can approach our health board. We can tell them that, you know, treatment hopefully is coming, and that, you know, try, you know, tell them about it, have funding in place for it. So when the treatment arrives, the treatment will be funded, because that is work we can do now. Because if a treatment, just say, came in 2 years' time, it's too late then going to your health boards looking for funding. Do that now, have funding in place, have the awareness there. That is something we can do.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Sure.
In our case in Cyprus, what we did, we invite the professionals to participate within the association. So we give them the opportunity to give a speech, or we inform them about the EHA, EHDN. So we keep them alert. So this is something that could assist in order, because as I told you, I mean, another dimension is to create relationships. I mean, to know people. I mean, doctors and all this stuff. In order, once medicine arise, to be in the place to know someone who have access to this. So in order to be in a position to train for that and provide the medicine. So we invited the specialists to come closer to association in order to create a network there, something like that.
Interesting. So really preparing the system to look out for when it comes, the application to be approved or be on the market, it's called for the drug. Then they have heard about it. It's not starting from scratch. At that time, it's being really prepared. That's what you're also saying, Marius, huh?
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge for every country, though, isn't it? That, you know, that it's interesting. We've got the kind of clinical development of the drug phase going on, and where we can all really play that key role is in the health economics, because that's going to be the key, isn't it? Is actually justifying that this drug works and is cost effective when you look at the whole lifestyle. And it's quite unusual, isn't it, for Huntington's, because there are not many diseases where you are symptomatic for this length of time. Except my wife, symptomatic for 20 years. Her uncle's just died. He was symptomatic for 34. So it's a lot of care that he's had at that time. Trying to put that into a figure and put it in. There was something, I can't remember which particular drug it was that was just announced last week. And they were saying that per person, it's something like £220,000 per year per person. And when you're talking about those kind of levels of cost, you've got to have a really good case for your approval body to say, yes, we're going to do it. And we haven't got anything else to compare it against yet. So this is really the starting point. But that really is important for everybody to try to start making it. And it would be difficult, you know, even those countries where you've got a fairly well-established sort of route, it's tough. So for those countries that don't have that real established route, that's really an area where people can play a key role now.
That brings me over to another thing, because I think it's really, Christina briefly touched upon it when she talked earlier today, is how early should we start treat, if we could, I mean, cherry pick and wish, and when should we not start? I mean, I have a sister in a very late stage. It doesn't really make sense to give her treatment to keep her in that stage any longer than what life's naturally course would be. Have you any thoughts about that? How early and how late in the disease should people be offered treatment?
I think it's very important that, because we are not used in HD in targeting, treating healthy patients. So one thing that I think it's going to be difficult, I think there are, if any therapy is yet, they are not yet proven to be effective. So we are talking about trials, and we are very optimistic. But if they are proven to be effective at the end, we have to deal with pricing, with accessibility, because it's different in each country, because you have to provide the drug to the patient, and you have to provide it. And it's not. I would love to have clinical trials in Portugal, because we have 8 million. We have a public system. We have a strong association, but we don't have patients enough. So that's the problem. And well, perhaps that's a deal. But when the therapies come, I would love to have it, even the clinical trials. But until then, we have to prepare to have those treatments or those therapies are available, because perhaps it isn't a pill. It's some procedure that the patient has to have it forever. And how can we convince a healthy patient that at her 20s or 30s it's going to be treated for lifetime? It is important to begin to think about that now. Because if you want to delay the disease, you have to start early, but the costs are different in each country, and you have to have a proper care system. Do you do it in home care? Do you do it in hospitals? Do you do it? How can we do it? So even in Portugal, for example, that we have a public system, if we are not able to have clinical trials, how can we be representative to have access to a drug that costs only the drug perhaps for 400,000 euros plus the care and the delivery and the long term? Of course, in the opposite, we have long-term disease to cost to the state. How much does it take to have a patient forever? How much do you spend in physical therapies, in everything that an HD patient needs in a holistic way? How much does it cost during 20 years? And that should be on the politician side. So I think
sure, the financial cost is one thing, but you ask, would healthy patients really be, or healthy people, they are not patients, could they be named that, willing to be treated? So let me ask Rob, would you take that kind of, for instance, intrathecal therapy injections before you really felt any symptoms? Is it possible to give an answer to that?
You're asking, I think, maybe the wrong person, because I have a very, how do you say that? I have a fear for needles. So,
but then you're representing a group of the population.
I'm getting better at it, but no, it's a very irrational fear of needles. But okay, no. To be honest, I think it is a question. I've been thinking about that, like the two sides of the story. Should you treat non-symptomatic people, and should you treat very late stage? And I think there is no, for me, there's no clear-cut answer yet, because first we have to see what happens. Let's say if Roche, this is the closest to the market, let's say it's successful, then what happens to these patients that are being treated? Are they delayed? What we assume. So that would mean that, let's say my mother or your sister will still probably die from the disease because they are maybe too far in the disease. So, but if there is a chance of recovery, obviously everybody wants to treat it, right? And we don't know yet. And that is, so on that late end of the spectrum, I think it will depend on what happens with the drug afterwards. Yeah, and then of course, personally, let's say if there would be a treatment now on the market with an intrathecal injection, I would take it. Of course, depending on how, let's say, how frequently I should do it. But now the scheme for Roche is 2 or 4 months. I think I can, step over my fear for needles every 2 months or so, or 4 months, and do that. I would do it even if I'm not symptomatic, because we know from a lot of studies that there is already some damage before you see the symptoms. So the sooner you can treat, the better, I think. But okay, that's my my view on it.
So can I comment on this?
Sure.
As a person who does not have a fear of needles? We don't agree. We don't agree on this, Rob. I firmly believe, and this is my viewpoint, that you are born with the mutated gene, therefore you have Huntington's disease from the beginning. It may not show outwardly that you have it, but you have it. And so I personally would take something now to, once, I wouldn't take it until, let's give Roche as an example, until they showed that it was effective. But if there was effectiveness, I would start taking it now.
Also, as you say, if the trial is effective and the treatment, it shows very promising results, I think the sooner you start taking it, the better, because it allows people to remain in the workplace. It allows them to work and contribute towards the government and taxes and everything. So it negates some of the costs, like coming back in the form of a treatment. And the longer you can keep somebody healthy, the longer you can keep somebody out of, long-term care, that is the trade-off. I know the costing of this is going to be a stumbling block when it comes to Department of Health in each country. But I think the longer you can keep people healthy and engaged with life, engaged in the workforce, I think that is the trade-off.
Can I just sort of address that point as well? We talked about later stage, because obviously Sandy's in the penultimate stage, and I've thought about this quite a lot, thinking, well, her quality of life is okay at the moment, but if the treatment purely delayed further deterioration, there must come a point. This happened with my mum. My mum had Alzheimer's, and for the last 6 years of her life, she had no quality of life. Her quality of life was dire, and to be quite blunt, it was a relief when she finally passed. So, at what point, can, and who? That's the other issue. Who makes that decision? But at what point can you say, well, actually now we've gone past the state where quality of life is an issue? That's just, we're into philosophical stages here, aren't we? We're not into medical stuff, and therefore that's going to be individual. But
or really ethical evaluation. What's the right thing to do? Huh?
Yeah, but coming back to what we said right at the beginning, there's a cost issue. Somebody somewhere, and I'm sorry to say this, but it often comes down to money, is going to say, but no, we're not going to spend that amount of money treating that individual if the budget is limited. And if treatment is limited, and that will be a challenge, I think, a real challenge. So I think there will still be, there will be all those who've got fantastic hope coming forward, because there will be treatments. Or the other one, which is interesting, I've heard mentioned quite a lot, is that it might not necessarily be one treatment. You might have a basket of treatments, and there might be 2 or 3 things you're doing with therapeutics, which kind of racks the cost up as well. So that's an issue as well. But there's got to come a stage where the kind of decisions will not be taken out of your hands, but you'll be fighting the system as you do now, because we've all probably got evidence of cases of very rare diseases where the cost of the treatment is expensive, and in our case, in the NHS isn't paying for it, so these people are going abroad to get it. And you could see that happening, couldn't you, further down the line, because people, spaces will want to do all they can for their loved ones. So it's going to be an interesting challenge, I think, coming down the road, because I don't think it's going to be cheap.
So this is where we start interacting with our health boards and preparing them. This treatment is coming. It is going to be expensive, but as you say, do your cost analysis. This is how much it takes to take care of somebody full time, who has Huntington's, and this is all the different things that they need. And, so this is where we should start putting our cases across.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying, because you are expressing, and I share that, you're expressing concern about the pricing. So this will be expensive, you're saying. Have you any thoughts about what, now you follow quite closely, the development of drugs. Why is it so expensive? Does it have to be? I mean, do you have any thoughts about where is the price setting coming from? It's a tricky question, I know, it's a complex question, but do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah.
I think some of the price setting is involved in the fact that it's a rare disease, numbers. So, if there was a treatment for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, then the numbers are high with those group of people. So the cost, Huntington's, well, it's still considered a rare disease. That might change in years to come, but still, it's the numbers, the people that would require the drug. And pharmaceutical companies, I think, in the end, need to make a profit, and that's understandable, and that's where the pricing is going to be set. It also, intrathecal injections is a very invasive procedure. If it was a pill, then I don't think the pricing would be as high, because you can just take a pill at home. Going to get a lumbar punch requires going to a clinic, having an anesthesiologist administer the drug in your back, staying there for the day. All that adds to the cost of the treatment.
Adding to that for the patients or the families is not the same. I think now Roche is ahead, and of course at some point we will have more therapies, and patients would prefer or have individual choices on late stages decisions about care and treatment. Also, I think being reversible or non-reversible procedures will matter. So, of course, oral or intrathecal is perhaps evident that everybody wants probably have to have oral treatments than having a needle on the back. But being reversible or being selective, it's a deal that now it's not being yet very approached. I don't think there's the awareness in the community. What does it mean to be allele selective or not, or reversible or not? But at that point, that there is clinical benefit from that. People would like to know if perhaps they are targeting the wild type of protein or not, because it's going to be future deals to
Knowledge,
not only the assets, but also the type of therapy, and that would.
We lost you because of the internet connection, I think, Christina, but you bring up really interesting.
For the pain or not, but I think
we lost you, sorry, because your internet connection. Sorry. But anyway, you bring up a very interesting question or topic, because it's about how efficacious, I think Rob also touched upon it, how efficacious, and if even not just slowing down the disease progression, but maybe even you may recover a little bit or get better in some functions, then it would have a higher value. I think that's what your point is, isn't it? Yes. So that's also an evaluation that will come with time, when we see how efficacious the treatment actually will be for people over a longer time period.
So Astrid, I think you touched on a point that I think that's not discussed, at least discussed very much, and that is, at what stage do you stop? If there was an effective treatment, what stage do you stop giving it? I think that actually is a Pandora's box that's being opened in terms of ethics, and that's another dynamics to things that I don't think people have actually thought about that. At least
I think you're right in terms of we haven't had a kind of an open public kind of discussion. It's something I've discussed with people I know well, to a certain extent. Would I like my wife, would I like my near close person to be treated at this point, when it's really that advanced stage, and you really just see that it's moving towards the end. And from my personal perspective, I would say I would much more prioritize the non-symptomatic, or you know, if you understand, to have more very early stage people treated than keeping the very late stage people on the treatment, if we have to, or I think we need to choose in some extent anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that, and that's my viewpoint. But there are people who will think that, you know, there's value in life right till the end, and I will do anything to keep my family member alive as long as possible. And that's a very hard, for me, that's not right, but that's my personal view. But there will be people who will want the treatment even for the late stages, and who makes that decision? Is there going to be a committee that says, no, you have, I think that's a whole area that's going to, if we get to the point where there is an effective treatment, I think that will be a whole new area that will need to be debated and looked at.
And treating pre-manifest opens the market even for pharma and for even industry, because the pricing can be connected to the public, and we have a rare disease, as you said, Dina. So if we target manifest and people which are symptomatic, it's a even less open market. If we are targeting early, even for companies, it will be less expensive because they are treating more people. And of course, this is an argument in dealing with the price, because they are going to have a much more enlarged market to be in. So it's not only an ethic decision, also the investment on the disease and the investment on the therapies would be different if you are targeting a larger population for the companies to make decisions.
I think there is coming up a couple of very interesting comments in the chat also, where Saya from Finland says that, Dina, there may be cultural differences in how people see this in terms of treating people in very advanced stages, where maybe some cultural perspectives are more to let life go as it does when you have really advanced disease and allow, you know, the end to come, while others would more want to really maintain whatever is left of life for as long as possible. And I also think there was another chat in the chat, let me see. And also what Shama brings up is that what you experience and what you can document of an effect from a drug in a trial is one thing, because that's an experiment. It's very strictly, you know, supervised in a way and recorded. And what's being experienced in real life by patients using it in a natural setting can be different, which is also really interesting and important to monitor and collect data to be able to say that this is worth the cost or whatever that may be, or this doesn't seem to be as efficacious as we thought it was, or whatever it is that we see. So there are many elements in this that we need to keep an eye on, I think.
There's a comment or a question from Felipa on the chat.
Philippa, do you want to drop in and say you have some interesting... Hi, Philippa from Portugal also.
I'm sorry for the length of the text. I think it's easier this way. The thing is, for me, I think it's fantastic, this webinar, and I really like to hear you about all the opinions you have about all these topics. But the main concern that I have is that my idea is that globally the knowledge of HD families is not this high. And so the thing for me is in terms of deciding to participate in trials, being it in a pre-manifest stage or late stage or whatever, the thing is you really have to be to have the facts and the information to give a proper informed consent and to decide to participate. So the idea, because for what I understand, your main job is to make the bridge with the pharma companies and so on, but how can HD Cope help in trying to disseminate information and raise the health literacy of the HD community? So to bring your expertise and knowledge that you have, because you are experts, to make the rest of the HD community as well an expert as well.
Thank you. So I'm cautious of time and we have come to the end, but I think really that's a good input, Philippa, because I guess webinars like this is one way to share or discuss whatever knowledge we have with the community or those who want to attend and take part together with us. And I also know that the HD Cope team members are very active in their communities and in their associations and are really being that bridge, sharing their knowledge and discuss with their communities. So that's at least efforts already being made by each one of them, as I know. So because
Astrid, if I may, in our presentation, of course, we have confidential terms we cannot reveal on our participation in meetings with the pharma. But one thing that we are always trying to do is having a friendly page, having friendly images, having the plain language that in consenting term that people can understand, having it prior to the clinical trials, having it not only in the patients but also in the family discussion prior to the clinical trial, prior to the clinician appointment, having it separate the care or the partner through the patient. They can both contribute with all the dilemmas and all the options that could be available. So one thing that we were able to enforce and empower was exactly improving the literacy on the people that are willing to give it a shot, not only in the clinical trials, but also in studies, also in Enroll HD, also because we are all as well being able to participate on the protocol of Enroll HD, even in Light Enroll HD, which is an observational study for the HD community that is very important to be in. And it is important that people have the knowledge and to empower that in a very simple language, because HD patients are not scientists and are not clinicians and are a little bit sometimes slower than the others. So we have to be flexible and more imaging, with more images than even with words. And that is a thing I remember that we
really you work as a translator from the scientific language to more lay terms. I'm sorry, Christina, I have to break you off because it's really time is overdue. But I want to thank you all, for the panelists, for sharing your time and your expertise and your interesting thoughts about all this. And of course, to everybody who attended Thank you so much, and I hope you will join other of the webinars that's coming up every week now on this time of the week. So next week it's how to manage, how to run an association in the COVID pandemic special times. So thank you for joining us today, and wish you all a very good night. And then we wave to each other. We want to hug each other, we can't, so we can wave. Bye.
Do we sing?
We can sing. Please sing, Steve. Sing a lullaby. It's good night song now.
Oh, we have our song, people.
Our song.
Okay. Well, I will arrange for some song next time. maybe.
North Star. Yeah, we can sing.
North
Yes.
Star. We will have that as a farewell song.
Philippa
But not
knows
tonight.
that song very well.
Exactly.
Thank
Now
you
it's the
so
sheet
much.
music at home.
Love you all. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Thanks for joining,
Bye.
people.
Bye.